Testing.
Today is Wednesday, March 22nd, 2023, and we will call this meeting to order at 5:38 p.m. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll move forward with the school committee member introductions. Councillor Scott is excused absent tonight, so we'll start with Member Beauplant.
Thank you. Paul Beauplant, representing Ward 7.
Megan Hurd, representing Ward 6.
Tanya Whitlow, Ward 4.
Elizabeth Eames, Ward 3.
Janet Bowden, Ward 2.
Bruce Damon, Ward 1.
Megan Parks at large.
Jake Langley, Superintendent.
Karen Puckhead, Assistant Superintendent.
Agenda item number 3 is the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that members would like set aside? Seeing none, that is adopted. Agenda item number 4 is public input. Members of the public may address the school committee for up to 3 minutes on non-agenda items now and on agenda items later. Comments that pertain to staff, personnel matters, or a student issue should be directed to the superintendent or the appropriate staff member of Lewiston Public Schools. Public comments shall be directed to the school committee and be brief, not repetitive, and related to the matter at hand. Before starting, please state your name, address, and affiliation to Lewiston Public Schools. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak tonight?
Probably wait yet. If that's okay. Yeah.
Right. Agenda item number 5 is to recognize Lewiston Public Schools students. There was a scheduling conflict, so we're going to reschedule that. Number 6 is to receive and potentially vote on field trip requests to the New England Aquarium in Boston, Massachusetts. And who is presenting that?
We have Travis here tonight in place of Erica. Thank you, Mr. Jalbert.
Hi, everyone. I think I was here about a month ago to propose another field trip for a different grade level down to Boston. So here I am again. This time it's a 6th grade field trip, looking to go down to Boston, visit the aquarium, and I believe their plan is also to take in an IMAX show while they're down there. So it's a 8:30 departure, somewhere around there. So after students get here off the bus, unload for the day, and arrival back to Connors, they're anticipating around 6:00 p.m. I think the permission slips have already been sent out and that aspect has been approved. So we would just have to focus and make sure we're all set with parent pickup on the way back and getting kids home at the end of the day.
Any members have any questions or comments? Nope. Nope. Miss Hurd, Member Hurd.
Do you know like the thickness of the glass in the aquariums, just to make sure that no like fish or sharks or anything like that are going to escape? What?
Yeah, last time I checked, the glass was 7 inches thick. I have no idea.
Is there a motion to approve? Motion by Member Beauplant. Oh, do you want to speak? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Apologize. You know, this should be a slam dunk. I'm just wondering about the bus situation. I would hate for buses to have to be trips to be canceled because of buses. Jake, your thoughts?
So this is actually a contracted bus outside of Hudson. Because it's outside of the school day, the drop off, Hudson's not able to accommodate the transportation. So Connors has contracted outside of Hudson for transportation. And just to clarify, someone asked for you to get a little bit of a jab with a silly question. It was not me. It might have been someone else in the audience. So I don't want Megan to look like she was being foolish on her own accord. Someone asked.
I was really trying
Give
hard
you-
to figure out where that came from. I mean, I pondered if it was serious, not, so I don't know. That's okay. It's all right. It's a lighthearted moment. It's easy.
Is there a motion to approve? Member Hurd and
I would like to make a motion to approve this field trip request to the aquarium.
a second? Seconded.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll make sure to protect the glass while we're there.
Agenda item number 7, to receive and potentially vote on a field trip request to Fenway Park. And after this, there's also Casco Bay, field trip request to Casco Bay, South Freeport, and field trip request to Bingham, Maine. Oh, can you push the button? Thank you.
All right, yeah, so the Fenway is an annual trip we've been doing for 4 or 5 years now. It's STEM Day at Fenway. It's put on and sponsored by NASA. And we're bringing 50 students down, busing them down. It's from a grant from NASA and stuff. And so they go down, there's all kinds of activities and stuff for the students to do. They get a meal ticket and stuff, and then we get bleacher seats and they watch me try and stay awake for the 7th inning, and we have a good time down in Fenway usually. So that would be number 1. Want to
Should we
vote on that
any
first,
items?
or?
Yeah, we have to. Yes. Okay. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Member Hurd.
I have a legit actual question this time, I promise.
All right.
So just in reading, the safety measure thing, it talks about, that each chaperone will carry one of their students' cell phone numbers. What if students don't have a cell phone or?
Well, they have our contact number, whether they have a cell phone number or not. And I mean, we keep an eye on everyone. It's not like, see you later, we'll see you at 3 o'clock or anything like that. We all, we all sit in the same area. We all have, chaperones designated for a certain amount of students that you're responsible for. So it's not just like, give me your number, have a fun time in Boston. It's chaperoned, and we keep an eye on the students, and they check in. And I would imagine if a kid didn't have a cell phone and he has my number and he gets lost, he's going to find the person next to him and has a cell phone and give me a call. So.
Member Bowden.
Thank you. So I was just looking, it looks like 9th grade STEM. Is this every 9th grade student who took a STEM?
No, unfortunately, we only get to invite 50 students.
And-
And so we typically try and base our decision. So the gold team, every team was allowed, I think, 10, 12 students, and 2 teams decided not to go for some reason. I didn't inquire why. And so the gold team and the purple team both got to invite 25 students. And so we based our decision on, one, if you've been in any sort of trouble and stuff, you're probably not going to get invited. And then kind of how much you've been putting in an effort towards your studies throughout the year, how much of an ability you might have to get there on your own. So we want to, people that don't have the ability and the wherewithal to be able to get to Boston on their own, maybe never even been out of this Lewiston, let alone Maine. We're trying to get those kids an opportunity to get down there and see what other people may not see at Fenway Park.
So is there an out-of-pocket cost for the students to go on this trip?
Not for the students, no.
Not for the students. And I'm looking at it and it says this is in our budget.
What's that?
This is more directed towards the superintendent. So this is $2,600. This is in our budget.
This has been ongoing, built in, I think, connected to either the Aspirations Lab or the Melmac grant. Don't quote me, I'd have to go look, but this has funding aside for it, these kinds of activities.
Thank you. That was all.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments? Member Whitlow.
my son was a part of this last year, so I know it was a very safe environment with lots of chaperones. And so I'd go ahead and make a motion to approve both of these field trips. So did
Just
we?
one at a
Oh,
time.
I'd go ahead and approve the Red Sox field trip.
Is there a second?
Second,
Thank you. All in favor? It's unanimous.
Go
Moving on.
Sox. Bingham, did you say the whitewater rafting was? the next?
Casco Bay is next on the list.
Pasco Bay. So again, that's another annual trip. I run a charter company, fishing charter out of Freeport, Maine. I donate the day to the students. As far as the boat and everything goes, I charge like $10 just to throw towards gas. If the students can't do that, then I take it out of the budget from the classroom. But this year it's kind of exciting because I've been approached by a news center they want to do like a expose kind of thing. We make fishing poles and we make lures and stuff. And then so the fishing on Casco Bay is kind of the culmination of the classroom and everything. And so Jack Mulmud from Channel 8 News wants to do a whole story on us making our fishing poles and then come out and film us fishing and stuff. So I'd obviously have to go and get approval by parents to be able, for the students to be able to do that. But I think the exposure and everything for Lewiston and, I think it's just awesome. So, and again, I was here, I think it was September. We talked about this last time and it's all, I go by exactly what the Coast Guard tells me to do as far as all the safety issues and everything. And, I run a very solid company and, I think it's great to be able to give this and make it a good opportunity for students that can get out there. And so I hope you all see it like that too.
Member Bowden?
Can you just quickly tell us how you choose the students who go on this field trip? I'm just curious.
It's the students in my main outdoor class.
Any other questions? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve this field trip.
Okay,
I will second that. Thank you.
thank you. All in favor? Again, unanimous.
And then last but not least, Bingham. So again, another annual trip that's been really successful with the students. I wish I could make this more available for more students, what I typically do. So it's whitewater rafting. We go up to Bingham, Maine, with North County Whitewater Rafting Company. We've been doing it for 4 or 5 years again. It's a great company. We go up rafting, they give us lunch and they take movies and slideshows of the rafting and everything. It's a little pricey. I donate one of my fishing charters. So I donate a $600 charter and a lot of students will pay or sell $5 raffle tickets, and whatever raffle tickets the students sell, it goes right against the cost of their rafting thing. So if they want to put the effort in, I get a lot of students that sell way more raffle tickets than what pays for their own, way to go. And so the cost right now, it's like 85. I think I put in $95 a student. It usually comes down to $45 or $40 after we get our fundraising and everything done. I'd love to be able to get the school behind it so I could offer it out to parents and say, hey, this is what the Gold Team does. And, I get charged $85 by the rafting people. And so I put $10 in and I try to make the busing and everything work for everybody. And it doesn't. It's too bad it doesn't, because it's an awesome opportunity that everybody should be able to get from the school. Last time we were at Bingham last year, there were 250 other students from high schools there. And those schools all stood up, got rides for the students to get there. So you might want to take that in consideration at some point too. But I do my part. I donate. I try to get the money that costs down for the students. It's awesome. It's a great trip. I have 20 people signed up right now to go. I'll probably be able to get 5 to 10 more by the time it's said and done. So that's about where we're at with that.
Member Eames?
So this one's not tied to a particular class.
No, this is an annual
Open.
kind of gold team field trip. I'm a main guide, so I try to get them outside, so.
Okay, thank you.
Member Bowden?
So in the field trip request, it says class or grade 9 through 12. So is it limited to just your gold team, your freshmen? or-
No, I invited my main outdoor students as well.
Okay,
And then I had 4 students that have gone in the past that asked if they could come along. So.
Okay.
That's why it's 9 to 12.
Member Hurd?
Thank you. So I think this is great. But my mom anxiety always gets a little heightened, depending on, so Kennebec is Kennebec, you're doing the Kennebec River, right? So not rocky, but can be fast, can have big
They all
waves.
can. Yeah, I mean, there's same dangers in every river.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
100%, I 100% agree. And I think it's great, and I'm not gonna not approve it. I just need to have it out there that I
Oh, yeah.
get a little bit of mom anxiety, and it will depend also to like how melting's happening, whether they let the dams go, like all of those things. But I hope you have a great time.
We will. It rained last year and we all laughed all the way through it. So it'll be good, I'm sure.
Member Eames, did you have another question?
I was thinking of asking about insurance, but I assume that's all figured out.
It's all through a guide service. So yeah, they're fully insured guide service, and same with my trips and my company. I'm $1 million policy, and we're all fully insured for all of that stuff. So.
Is there a motion? Oh, Member Bopolant?
I'd just like to thank you for putting your money where your mouth is. You support it financially out of your own pocket, and it's appreciated.
Thank you.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Corey.
Agenda item number 10, to receive and discuss budget updates with a potential budget approval vote. Superintendent Langless will present.
So I want to kick off by saying that at this stage of where we're at, you'll see potential vote on the budget every meeting. I don't anticipate that happening tonight, but didn't want to find ourselves in a situation down the road where if you wanted to vote, it wasn't there. So public didn't have a chance to weigh in. Also, wanted to encourage people to be part of the process. And so hopefully more will show up as we go through the details of what I think is going to be some pretty robust discussions. I shared a couple of documents with you today, but I want to walk through, if I could, the budget Q&A follow-ups first. I put version 2 at top, or V2. This process seems to go well, so we have it documented, just some of the things we've talked about that we're trying to get back to you with information. And so the Connors custodial line that was looked at last time, they did find a coding error, so that was a move from one part of the budget to the other. So that was the high number on one particular line that was noticed. The full day pre-K. This one I'm going to read a little bit because it was something that we did look into, and I know some others have asked kind of offline about this, and certainly this could bear more discussion. A full day pre-K, a grant was brought up. There wasn't a grant for the Department of Education. The grants for the full day pre-K were announced, and then we researched what the criteria was for them. And the grant noted preference was going to be given to districts who had either no pre-K programming, because that's not statewide yet, or programs that didn't yet have a partner. There's a lot of federal programs that are partnering with pre-K programs. And so this was kind of startup money to get people going, with the intent of it being for 1 year. And in that 1 year, you could pay rent in a space to get it started. You could buy furniture because of the littles that people didn't really have. You could do salaries for ed techs, things like that. But what it didn't pay for was your teachers. And what it didn't do was going beyond the first year. So we had looked into that. Didn't think that we would be a recipient if we did pursue it. We also wanted to add that part of your submittals, you had to state how you would sustain that grant in future years, which can be a challenge. Right now, we serve 239 students. If we went full day pre-K, the shift in what happens, unless we add more teachers, but with the same amount of teachers, we would serve less students. I think it was about 50 less, 192 in here. If we keep kids longer than the partial day, what happens next is you have to provide a snack and an opportunity for a nap. And so the part of the day that we have them, we're not doing the nap piece and that next snack. So if we keep them full day, I'll go back to what Member Bowden said in a prior meeting around what are we doing for students in that capacity? Does it become more like childcare in that instance? And so it's debatable. Right now we have 2 shifts for our pre-K folks. So they have a morning and afternoon session. And then we also have our partner in Promise that does more full day things or longer time periods. But that's a partnership that we have with them. That's not in all of our schools, only in some. So I want to just provide you more detail about why we were thinking along those lines. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I hope it's not appropriate. Are you aware of the literature of for the kids' developmental ability and so on, of the advantages of full-time over part-time or part-time over full-time?
Yes, absolutely. And I will say publicly, and I've said this in a lot of places, if we could provide full day or a 5-hour program to all students, that would be the ideal. But the amount of space and the amount of staffing that would require to then have to serve just the students that we have would require more staff and more space. But yes, absolutely am aware of that. And a lot of that research, we talk a lot about that research with Promise, with our partner, who partners with us for our Connors pre-K program. And the data does show that the students who are with us for 5 hours, they have more time, their performance, their growth is better.
One other logistical challenge that existed with offering longer programming, our pre-K runs are during midday. And so if we open this up to full day, I think we'd see our application numbers potentially even double, because the amount of people that if it could be full day, they would do it. And where it's not, it makes that challenge in the midday piece. But transportation could become cumbersome because you're trying to move whatever that additional amount of students is start and finish. So those are other barriers that, again, not that we couldn't overcome. And we talked about full day pre-K months ago with how do we make it happen before the grant was announced, in an attempt to try to bring it on. So we're in support of it. I just think logistically right now, financially right now, it would be very hard to do.
Member Hurd.
Thank you. For Promise, is there an option to do that in like more than one of our schools, or is it strictly just one school?
So sorry, Jake, I'm hitting you in my chair. Yes, it's definitely something that we've talked to Promise about. They have a limited capacity as well. I will share, it doesn't save us a ton of money to do that, because we have an MOU with Promise and they're responsible for pieces and we are responsible for pieces. So thinking about financially what that means. The other thing that we consider as we think about that partnership, the staff that staff those classrooms are not LPS staff, they're Promise staff. So the expectations of those staff are based on what Promise has for expectations and not what LPS. So they're not covered under our collective bargaining agreement. Their salaries may differ, but that's part of that MOU process to come to an agreement. We provide busing, and we provide space, and they provide staff and some other supports as well. So it is a possibility. We also have a partnership with Promise that services McMahon students at Hillview. They have a classroom at Hillview that's part of our partnership as well. But we haven't expanded beyond that because of what that could mean for a really big shift with staff, as well as the students that are eligible for pre-K through Promise. There's only because they're federal program, they have requirements around socioeconomic status and things of that nature. They only have a limited number of spots for students who are not fall into those categories. So that could limit who would be in those programs because of those limited number of spots as well.
Member Bowden and then member Beaumont.
Thank you. This might be a future agenda item, I suppose, but since we're on the topic, I just want to ask. So if we're not going full day pre-K, we're not doing the 5 hours. I guess I'd love to see a breakdown of what a 3-hour day for pre-K looks like in our public school system. And I only say that because I spoke back and forth with a pre-K teacher through email, and she told me that they feed the children twice in a 3-hour span, which seems extremely wasteful, and sort of a waste of time, I guess. In 3 hours, I understand if we need to feed them lunch, but is that something that we could look into, maybe bagging and sending home with them on the bus instead of having them at school? To me, it just seems like a snack and a lunch in a 3-hour period for some littles. I would just love to see us make the most of the time we have with them. If there's more developmentally appropriate things we should be doing. So just a breakdown would be really cool if you could add that onto a future meeting.
Yeah, we can certainly bring that back to you. I know that one thing, and I'm sorry, I kind of made a face when you said bag lunch, is I think of the problems that causes with us with transportation, and also with the waiver constructs of how food has to be served because we're a federally funded full receiver. So where there are so many criteria around nutrition, but we can definitely get you more detail to bring back, because there's times in which we're allowed to do bag lunch and times when we're not. There's age restrictions, there's content restrictions, but
I'm just
I wanna
thinking back
check.
to our COVID days when anyone could pull up to the school and grab a bag lunch if they wanted a lunch that day.
yeah, they issued a federal waiver at the time. Now they have what they call on-site rules. I don't know if it would apply to pre-K though. I want to check.
Oh,
It was
sorry, member Beaumont.
Thank you. I'd just like to clarify the issue that I brought up, the concern from personal standpoint. As I've said before, my two sons went through the Lewiston system very satisfactorily, more than satisfactorily, but one was born in October, the first one, and he went to early kindergarten, and he was a young kindergartner, and it really didn't go well. And a few years later, the August son that was born in August sat out a year, and he took to it like a duck to water. So that's my personal observation. I wanted to know if it was supported in data. Thank you.
Member Hurd.
Thank you. So I just want to thank both of you, because this was something that I brought up that I did have some questions about, mostly because I have a pre-K student, so I see what happens on the daily. And to go back to what Member Bowden said, they have breakfast and lunch, and the amount of food that I pack with my daughter, she mostly comes home with most of it because she's not hungry because they eat too much in that short, because I feed her breakfast in the morning, then she gets breakfast there, and then she eats lunch. So she doesn't eat because she's being offered too much food while she's there. And I think the reason why I asked about this a little bit is because I see some of the pre-K teachers are very stressed a little bit that they are not able to fulfill their full curriculum in the time span that they're given. And they're worried about, making sure all their SIOP is taken care of and all of this stuff. So any less stress we can put on them, I think is definitely favorable. And I think too, we also need to think back when I went to school, we had half day kindergarten, and now we have full day kindergarten. So it's definitely something that we potentially can do if we have the money, if we have the space, if we have the staff, if we have, there's a lot of things that we need to have in order to do it. But I think that it's something that we should keep continuing to talk about and see if it's something that's possible. Because I think if we look back from when it was half day kindergarten to full day kindergarten, the pros definitely outweigh the cons. So thank you.
Okay, next on the Q&A, we have the facility savings. And I'm trying to use some discretion here, but really I'm talking about Member Hurd's husband, who works in the field, who's pretty familiar with some strategies around the way in which we put requests for proposals out to people. So we do that, but I think he's going to add to our approach in how we try to request those prices and do some costing. So we do anticipate some savings there. So Greg, if you're listening, we thank you for that. Mud Week, Ice Week, and summer school. This has been a topic that we've talked about for some time, especially going back before budget when we had midterms, and there was some feedback there. But we wanted to get more specific about funding, because over the last few years, we pushed some things off out of the local budget. Where the money has been coming from is kind of a bit of a spider web, but it's been pieced together. And so every permissible area of cost we've tried to use. So you see some ESSER funding. There's some multilingual funding because we're providing services to students who are language learners. You see some general fund dollars, things like that. There's transportation dollars, all kinds of things. And so we just want to share that the general cost around that for summer school is around $70,000. Not an inexpensive thing that we offer. And also that we got some numbers from the person who used to facilitate them, and the projected cost for Ice and Mud Week, they range from $7,500 to $9,000. We put 9 in because costs haven't gone down. So I want to be smart about that, but that's the projected item there. Also included that I do think we should consider the phasing out of Ice and Mud Week now that midterms and finals have returned, because there's built-in time within those weeks for to do makeup and what have you. There's other times during the semesters in the year that students could do that. I do have reservations about some second chance things around summer school, because we also have that. The other side of that challenge is trying to get more and more students to graduation. And the continuum there for me has always been, I believe we can get all students to graduation, but the difference is how much time and support they need to get there. And the problem though, and I saw it when I was there as a principal like many years ago now, students take advantage of it and they'll push stuff off because they can do it later. And I think that's human nature. That doesn't make a bad kid, but teachers are really working hard to hold lines and teach kids that matters. And I think that can be like banging your head against the wall at times. So I do think we should be looking at it. I would like to run through finals and get feedback on the midterm and finals kind of more comprehensively before we phase that out. Certainly we'll follow the direction of the school committee. One other note here at the bottom of that section, Mud Week, Ice Week, and summer school are not part of our policy. They are things that we have done and for different reasons over time made sense in the moment. But it's not a policy correction, at least in that sense, that we have to work on. So I guess to kind of give you more fuel for that conversation, if you wanted to make the change, it wouldn't be a policy decision, but certainly you could create the directive that we as a district are not doing certain things anymore. But it doesn't necessarily have to go through a policy process unless you wanted to add something to prevent it. We could go from there.
Member Whitlow?
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of reiterate what I had mentioned the last meeting about looking at policy, not so much for Ice and Mud Week, but for how students pass in work and can do things late. That's because I know that must be in our policy on how many times you can take a test or all those.
It may be school level or department related. We'll dig into that a little more, come back to you. I don't believe it is a school committee level policy as far as makeup work, but I'm not certain.
I feel it is, but now I'm going to have to, because I feel like I might've been a part of something in the past with that. So.
Yeah, we can give that a look and bring that back.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
It mentions phasing out Ice Week and Mud Week now that we have midterms and finals. And you said that because there would be some kind of time in midterm and final weeks to make up some of that work. So if that's the case, how is that actually addressing the culture that people are saying is problematic of I'll do it later, or I'll just make it up? Because it's still giving them an opportunity to do it later and make it up. It's just a different time frame to do it later and make it up.
Yeah, I do think it shifts some accountability where there's not a full week that you can go do those things. And I think the other thing that happens to me, at least for me in that construct, because there's still go after school and see a teacher, come in early, make an arrangement during a prep period, all those kinds of things. So there's always, for students, I think there are many opportunities to get more time and support other than the ice and mud week. But I think you make a good point. If there's time during the midterms and finals, it's still a something, but it has a different time constraint and you got to go see the teacher. Ice week and mud week has been unique in that hypothetically, if I was the teacher, I may not be there for ice and mud week, but I'm asked to prepare the work that the student has missed during my class the first semester to make up. And to me, that's always been kind of a cumbersome component. Whereas summer school is different. You're going to do things that you've not yet demonstrated that you know, and it could be with whoever you get, and the assignments could be totally different. The midterm and final piece makes you go to the teacher, work through the teacher, and not bypass them in the vacation week. But it's still second chance. I am not anti-second chance. I'm a big proponent of time and support, but I do want to shift that culture of I'll do it later. We really want to get away from that for kids.
I think if a lot of people are feeling like that's problematic and that they want to shift away from that, that's great. But I don't know if eliminating something Ice Week and Mud Week, which have proven to be very beneficial to a lot of students and have helped the graduation rates and have helped kids pass. I don't know if that's the solution. I don't know if there's another way to look at it to sort of change the expectation that kids don't have 10 times to retake a test. I don't know that eliminating Ice Week and Mud Week is the way to do that, though. Just my 2 cents. Member Eames.
Thank you. So my child graduated a while ago, so the reintroduction of midterms and finals, he had them, but now they've been gone for a while and now they're back. Is that that's my understanding? Are they're at a certain time and you sink or swim, or are you take them a million times to demonstrate your proficiency?
So the midterms and finals, they encouraged staff to measure students' learning. It didn't have to be comprehensive, and they really encourage people to not create a gotcha. If you don't pass this, you will fail. So they limited how much it counts in your class, but also try to encourage the scope of the activity or assessment to be more about an assessment, and you have time to do some things if you need remediation, less about kind of the college atmosphere with the blue book of, here's your book, pass it in when you're done. And so we're trying to strike a balance between a little bit of rigor to get people ready, but not make it a gotcha moment where students can fail even though they've done good work for the semester.
Member Hurd.
Thank you. I also think we need to remember too, like these are kids. And so like, let them be kids. These are vacation weeks for them to sleep until noon and meet their friends at Dairy Joy for ice cream and like do those types of things. So hold them accountable, make them get their work done. And then during those times, like they need to be forced to take a break and step back and take a break from school and like do all those things that kids should be doing while they're on vacation.
I haven't said this often enough, but I also worry about teacher burnout. It's often our very passionate staff who want kids to succeed and do well, who are at every ice week, every mud week, and every summer school, and they never get a break either. So I worry about that.
The way you were just describing midterms and finals sounds different than a long time ago when I took midterms and finals. So is it possible that if a student is missing some work that they traditionally would make up during ice week and mud week, they do a midterm and this would then be used in place of those standards that they were missing? So then they wouldn't need to make up that work during ice week or mud week? Is that a possibility or no?
So there's 200 teachers at the high school, but and so there's some variables in there. So I don't want to speak in a concrete, this is the way it is sort of way. But I will say, yes, in essence, that's the idea behind the piece, is that once you demonstrate standards in a way that you have demonstrated them. And so I would think that this assessment would backfeed to anything that a student would have missed prior. So there are some of those students out there who are the good test taker, who don't necessarily do all the little pieces. So that piece could play in, but I can't speak for individual teachers who have either departmental or building-based limitations. And that sometimes includes how much work have you done along the way? What were your passing scores? So I know a while back there was a shift, and I'd have to go look at it specifically, but you'd have a student not write anything on a test, put their name at the top so they can ensure a retake. And then they saw it was on the test and they could just be thinking about it and try to come back and take it. So I think that created a lot of heartburn for people appropriately. And so there's also not that piece. So it's a bit of a balance of each, but I think that it would be, a lot of it will land in an individual teacher approach as to how that lands. And at the end of the day, and we have multiple educators here, but what the teacher issues for the scores for those pieces and others ultimately is their decision.
Member Bowden?
Thank you. You might have just answered this, but I guess I'm still going to ask it because I'm just. When a student, let's say a student doesn't do any assigned homework for, the first half of the quarter that they're in, or the first quarter altogether, they just don't do any of the homework. And midterms are coming up and now they know it's crunch time and they need to make up some of that work. Are they getting those exact assignments that the rest of the class did, or are they getting something like computerized, like a little bit easier, like, well, here's this can cover that standard. So read this paragraph and then write something about it. And I only ask because I was personally helping somebody try to do some credit recovery last summer, and it was English, and it was English 10 and it was English 11. And it was like all that. It was just, you need to read this paragraph and then you need to write about it. And it was like multiple of that. And it just didn't seem like it was probably the work that the rest of the class probably did the entire year. So I'm just curious what we're doing to help students reach those credits. Are we not dumbing it down, but are we dumbing it down basically? Is that?
So I wouldn't say we're dumbing it down because we're using different tools, electronic tools to help facilitate learning. But we also have run into situations where a student is trying to recover 5 credits over the summer because they kind of didn't do school for a year, where there's a life interruption or just didn't get it done. So there are some electronic tools. Those have oversight with adult assessments, with teacher assessments tied to them. So that's the component of that. The other thing, depending on when it was, it might have been connected to like Edgenuity, which is actually being phased out for us slowly. So we're using a different program now that is a little more rigorous. But we do have things in like Play-Doh, Edgenuity, iReady at the younger levels. They're all electronic based platforms that the students, if they achieve and then they demonstrate it with the adults, they can earn credits. I can't speak to it. There's no intention to dumb things down, but I do think that the hard thing is that value of seat time in the school classroom environment and what you can pick up versus what you can pick up when you're just trying to check off boxes to get credits. And I would always encourage students to have the classroom experience and not the online component, but
the word equity comes up a lot, and I just want to make sure that we're holding all of our students like to the same standard. If they're in a class and they're just choosing not to do things, and then it comes a time when they have this mud week to just make up everything that they haven't done, are they actually making up the work that the rest of the students have had to do throughout?
Again, I can't speak to everyone, and I'm sure some teachers could chime in. There are some teachers who have been rumored to provide more difficult work during Ice and Mud Week because they can. There have been some that have provided different work, and there have been some that have provided the same work. I know that some went away from providing the same work because students had seen it or could pick up on pieces throughout, and they wanted to make sure it was authentic. But I can't speak to everyone. We do provide teachers time to prep that work for students once they've signed up, which is again another ask of teachers to prep those items. So I don't think it's easier in that context. If you complete, it might be seemingly easier if you look at one activity or two. But when you look at the context and the scope of the whole, I think we have a lot of students not finish those courses because they kind of keep going because of the rigor.
Member Medina?
I was just wondering we have heard from any teachers on their thoughts about Ice Week, Mud Week, summer school, makeup, and if not, is there a way we can like survey them and ask them what they think, maybe some suggestions, anything like that?
Yeah, they did a survey after midterms. That's why I was saying I'd like to wait till after finals to kind of get a full year scope of what the feedback is, but we definitely want teacher input on that for sure, and students.
Member Boholt?
Thank you. I'd just like to clarify that the students are not receiving a 90/95 on the transcript. It is a pass. It's good.
Yeah, in some situations a pass, but correct. When students are doing recovery or makeup things, they don't typically have access to the 100%. Right. The next one is special ed tuition, and I don't want to say a lot about this. I feel like we discussed it a fair amount, but I just wanted to note that due to the staff and the space constraints of providers, that we did propose reducing the initial request by $500,000. And wanted to reiterate, because I know we'll have lots of discussion around budget, that this is a bit of a gamble. And we're hopeful that as we grow our in-house ability, there'll be cost offsets from the tuition that we do not pay out and that we could then use for internal purposes. Sorry.
Member Damon?
Yeah, I'm certainly no expert in the special education area. Fortunately, I have very limited exposure to it, but I'm not happy with this gamble. I think regardless of how difficult the budget season we think we're in, we still have an obligation to all of the kids with the IEPs. We have an obligation to try to conform to the DOJ consent agreement that we have in place. And I can't support this, taking this extra $500,000 out. I think the $1 million has to go back in.
Member Eames?
If it were not spent because of the reasons you anticipate, what would happen to it?
It becomes fund balance for future use.
Not for that year's use, but for a future year's use, or for that year's extras?
The only way we would use it in that current year would be if we brought something to you and said that we want to do something and this is how we could pay for it because we're seeing excess funds there. Otherwise, it just goes into fund balance for future use.
Member Hurd?
Thank you. So even by taking away this 500,000, we're not, and this is kind of like a double negative, but we're not providing services for our students that currently have 504s or IEPs or those types of things. This money is strictly for students that are on a wait list for a school, not our district, because we don't offer the services that they need here. Correct? So this money is for students that would go to another location like Margaret Murphy or something like that. And because those centers are all full and don't anticipate seeing any openings, this is why we're taking this away, because we don't feel that we're going to be able to place those kids because these other places aren't going to have openings. Correct? Is that the way I'm understanding this?
So for the most part, you said yes, that's the gamble. We're gambling that there won't be spaces. But what happens to students who are on wait lists, if we're not able to provide the services here, they get what we can provide. And so they get specialized services. If we can secure someone to do them, they get tutoring. Oftentimes that's remote. I don't feel great about that. But I also know that there's some realities in our financial situation. And so none of the recommendations for reductions, I shouldn't say that. Most of the recommendations for reductions have been very difficult to put on paper and say, given the situation, I think this is what we need to do. So I feel the same sentiments that Member Damon just shared, but I also feel, to your point, we don't think that we'll be able to spend the money because the spaces won't be there. But I also don't want to say that we're providing as much as I would like to the students who could otherwise have those services or different services if there was a spot and.
Member Bowden? Oh,
Sorry, but we're providing the services to the best of our ability is what you're saying. So they're not getting any. We're providing what we have available is what you're saying. Just nothing.
We are providing the very best that we can,
Right.
but yes.
Thank you.
Member Bowden.
Thank you. And that original $1 million figure is an estimate. It's not an exact number that we would need, correct?
Correct. It's an estimate based on the students we have in our waiting list and what we project that students would be outplaced with the information we have now. So yes, it's an estimate.
So this 500,000 is also just an estimate of, if we were to place some, it would probably be around this much money because there's not enough space in these other programs for the full amount of students currently.
I guess I want to go back in history a little bit too and say that I believe, and Adam and Bill can probably fact check me if they recall with all the numbers we've been talking about, but I believe the initial number was around 1.2 million. And I said, let's trim that down to 1. And the 1.2 was the estimate of if we placed the kids, what would it cost? And so we came in with $200,000 less than that. So this is actually and I won't do this with every item, but this is really like a $700,000 reduction from where we started. That's not uncommon though, from where we start to what you see when we present.
So I just want to say I'm comfortable. I mean, I know it's a gamble, but I know how much of a need there is out there and I know it's not getting fulfilled. And so it just makes sense to me in that aspect.
Just one thing I do want to add to is the return on subsidy. So when we spend less in special education, that ED 279 next year will be smaller because of what wasn't spent. And so when we're talking about this budget right now for next year, it's 2026 that we're talking about from a subsidy perspective. So when we budget, we have to think forward that 3-year window.
Member Eames.
So let's say a brand new school opens up, miraculously they get staffed, and it turns out we do need to spend more than we budgeted. Can we? Is there money to spend, let's say, from the other year's rainy day fund or fund balance? So the worst case scenario would be we budget for half, we need it all. It's a good scenario in the sense that the kids are getting what they need, but then where would we get that money if we didn't budget for it? That's my question.
So what we can't do is just use fund balance that hasn't been assigned and voted on. And so there's mechanisms if we got really desperate, but that's not just standing there. So I wouldn't just bring you something that said, my recommendation is we use fund balance that wasn't voted on to just pay for this. There would be steps to it if we can get that approved. In other shortfall years, sometimes what we've done, these would be more extreme measures, like we can freeze a budget and say, we're not hiring these open positions, we're not buying any more pencils, we're not buying any more paper. We can freeze budgets and do those things. And then with funds not spent in that way, it would be before you to approve to spend funds that belong in a different area. We would actually be transferring it. So what you would be approving is transferring things from one article that has been approved to another to be expended for that kind of shortfall. That's permissible. Within an article, we can overspend a line as long as the article itself can hold it. So for example, you might see like we come to you and say, we need a director or a supervisor of blank in regular instruction, but we have 10 unfilled teacher positions. So we want to use those funds to do that thing. So that changes in the budget atmosphere in our world if you approve it, but it's not a new cost. You actually did that this year when we put positions at Root Ed and made some positions available for the store next door. You were approving money that already exists in the budget from unfilled things and then expending it differently. But we can't just go to fund balance. That's not how that works. One other thing I'll say, and I'll mention in the next document, is to talk about how we develop a reserve. And so that we have a place that we can reach that would be local tax neutral at this point. That again, we would have to go through a process and referendum, but you could approve once that happens to use funds for this kind of expense. So, but that's me trying to plan for a really lean budget. And if something bad happens, we don't have a plan B. So that reserve would be plan B.
So that being said, then I'm with Bruce. I'm very uncomfortable with this gamble.
So this is actually like a double gamble because we're gambling that those spaces won't become available and those students won't need those services. But we're also gambling on the fact that we're going to get less money in a future budget to support a department that's just growing in need, not shrinking. That's a big double gamble. Yeah, that's all. I just wanted to say that out loud.
Another item that's come up, we haven't necessarily talked about it here, but we have seen some messaging in our inboxes. I'm an arts supporter. I don't know if you know that, but I will say it out loud. Big supporter of the arts wing and the expansion and our arts programs. One of the things on the list of potential reductions to consider is a reduction in a music teacher. And in part, the way that played out, just so you know, is that we have found someone that does it part-time who's doing a great job. And we think that could continue. So in this budget proposal, we shrunk the number on that role. So it has the appearance of a reduction, but we kind of have a backup plan. And if that works out, great. The problem is if it doesn't, we're going to have to come back to you. But I would also add, we are struggling to find instrumental, strings, brass, music teachers who teach instrumental things. We're struggling to find them. So kind of an all call for those interested. We're looking to grow that. We have really good numbers at our young grades. And so continuing that up through is something that we want to keep an eye on. Transportation, we talked about some items related to transportation and what can we do to save cost. And so we had looked at a few different questions around that. And I mentioned, like, if we hypothetically did not bus to the high school, would it save money? And the answer from our transportation folks was that you may save a little, but not a lot, because those buses are picking up both middle and high school students. So unless you cancel high school and middle school, your cost savings is really what we spend in fuel and time to come to the high school and then leave to go to the middle school and vice versa. So that was one. The other piece that you could consider is expanding the distance that is in policy to get a ride to school. And so down below, I shared the actual language from the existing policy, EEA. And so it states grades 9 through 12, it's 1 1/4 mile or more from school that students get a ride. And the distance and the way it's measured is in there. And then we have one last component I wanted to share, that the contract that we had with Hudson that came up, but where are we in the contract? We have a contract with them through the end of the 25-26 school year. So we've got about 3 years left. And that was it for Q&A. Although if we missed any, please feel free to share now or send us an email or we'll follow up.
Member Hurd?
Thank you. I just had one quick question. It made me think about it when we were talking about pre-K. I know on that list of things that you had given us of potential savings or whatnot, there was a pre-K position in an ed tech. I'm assuming that's like due to enrollment or some sort of those numbers. But how can we forecast like what's coming in the future, as we haven't sent out registration for pre-K yet? Like, what if we eliminate that and then first, and I know we've kind of been trending down in pre-K, but like, what if for some crazy reason pre-K numbers go up, then where are we?
You're exactly right. Forecasting pre-K numbers is next to impossible. What we looked at is a multi-year trend, and we tried to go back to before the pandemic numbers. And we think because of enrollments, we will be able to do that. But it could be actually all of the reductions that are connected to enrollments could pose us in a situation where we show back up and say, we need another teacher. Because these reductions present you with that line of projection. And so if we have an influx of any kind, it could cause the need to put things right back.
And just a follow up. So I know there's an AM and PM offered, and I know just in a couple locations they have like kind of skewed numbers, like the morning sessions are a little bit heavier than the afternoon, or the afternoon's a little bit heavier than mornings. And I don't know how you guys look at that and how you structure it, if that's by school and like how that all gets decided, whether it's rides or, whatever. I don't know how that all like kind of works and like goes along, but I didn't know if there was a way to try and make it like, if we're going to reduce, just make it like a little bit more like the classrooms, like the AM in the afternoon, a little bit more like equivalent, if that's possible, or.
Yeah, so for the last, I don't know how many years, it really has, the class makeup has really depended on transportation because the transportation for kindergarten is for pre-K is different than our other buses. So we send out a whole different set of buses, right, to pick up pre-K kids. So it's really been driven by, no pun intended, it's been driven by transportation in that if a bus is going to one area of the city, they're picking up the students for pre-K in that area of the city. We'd have some new software in transportation to help us with our routing. And it's something that I've asked our transportation director to be very mindful about with the new routing system and to be really looking for ways to do just what you said in terms of making it a little bit more, making classrooms more diverse and making classrooms more rounded out, if you will, just to put it out there is the way, we have a lot of students in different sections of our pre-K class, different AM and PM that do come from specific areas of our city, and then the afternoon it's the other areas of our city. So that's a great question. That is how it's been done, and that is a focus to really work on getting that so that's not the case.
Thank you.
This might be an overshare, but also impacts the things like when we stopped running the buses, or we asked Hudson to stop running the buses to St. Dom's, because we were canceling rides for our children, but those were still running. Those buses also came back through to pick up pre-K kids. So when we shifted them, it created a new dynamic on what kids could go where as they continued to enroll. So there's a lot of juggling to do. I do have another version of our budget memo, and just to talk about some different things. I don't have new reductions, but I just want to share kind of where we're at and where I think we're headed. But I know that Mr. Pavin, I don't know if you want to wait for me to go through that, or if you wanted to add something about some of the things we just talked about. Okay. So kind of just giving us a state of where we're at in the budget. So the things that we have done so far have been really sharing with you kind of my first version of the budget, and then reductions that are potential for you to consider. And so that's the superintendent's version of the budget. Right now, we have transitioned to the phase of what, at least in our books and when we do binders and things, we start talking about the school committee's version of the budget. And so we spent a few weeks, I apologize, listening to me. But now I think we're going to need some time to hear input, obviously, from you. I'm sure there's more questions and things that we want to talk about. I want to mention again publicly that we put potential vote on the agenda. I think you're going to see that numerous times, but I don't anticipate a vote just yet. I think we still want to work on some different items. Just to recap, we've itemized $3,958,518 worth of potential reductions. The ask of taxpayers with the latest valuation numbers is $1.64. That's an increase. But also to make you aware that that includes 65 positions, some of which through vetting and special ed restructuring, we know we can reduce, many of which are hard to say out loud. As far as the next steps go, there's numerous ways we can proceed. Each committee each year, I think, does it a little bit differently. But you can accept the things that have been shared to date or debate those items. You can discuss either items that you want added back or items you want to review or talk about What are some other ways that we could achieve something? For example, could we use more fund balance to do something that you really want done? The answer is yes, that is a possible thing. And I'll throw out words of caution of how that impacts things long term, but it's still the discretion of the committee. You could ask to seek further recommendations for reductions. I think last week, I say last week, it was Monday, 2 days ago. Member Whitlow threw out, could we talk about the ice and mud week thing? I think that was a good conversation. That's how this round kind of goes. So if you have other thoughts in mind, we want to get them down on paper and answer what we can and track them. There, you could direct me to go find further reductions and bring them back to you. So you could have ideas, or you could tell me to go find ideas, and we'll work as a team, whatever's decided to go do that. There's also a note at the top of page 2 that we do anticipate insurance information within the next 2 weeks. Sometimes they sneak it out a little early, so it could be next week. That could tell you something. So that could tell you we actually have $700,000 more than we thought in this budget because that was a reduction. So that when we get that number, certainly the next meeting, we'll share that with you. Actually, you'll probably get an email because I'll be so excited if it's a reduction. But that number could play into, okay, do we really want to reduce this, this, and this, or should we put money back in places? Or do we just leave it as a reduction and it gets pulled out? And if it's higher than 12%, we have a whole different discussion to have because we would be immediately adding to the budget. And that would be a big number. Future planning, I mentioned this a little while ago, but an organization of our size, we really should have funds available for exigent circumstances. We do propose adding reserve fund. There's a referendum process to that. And we're going to talk to legal about it, but if it's something the school committee would like us to pursue, we would do so. I think it's really important for you to understand that Lewiston Public Schools, to my knowledge, has not had a reserve, at least in the 15 plus years that I've been here. I just don't understand how that happens. In an organization our size, there is literally no reserve fund. Every business, every nonprofit, everybody has an account that they don't dabble with that is there just in case. We don't have that. And so earlier when we talked about like, can you use fund balance? The answer is no, because it's not been allocated through referendum. The taxpayers haven't approved that as an approach. My proposal to you is that we look at how to do that and we discuss a number. The interesting thing is this could be neutral to the taxpayer in the moment. And I say in the moment because the dollars have already been raised by taxes. It sits in a fund balance. So I'm not naive to think it's free dollars because it's not. But what it would be is you going through the legal process, through our legal advice, and posing to our community, we would like to use fund balance as a reserve fund that would be accessible to the school committee to use in exigent circumstances. And so we want to talk to them about the exact language, but this would be included potentially. I want to check with legal first in the budget vote that comes up, but it wouldn't be a tax increase on the mill rate this year. But I'm going to want your input on, do we want to pursue that? I think as lean as this budget is, it would be smart of us to do. If we don't use it, it stays as a reserve. That would be part of the thinking. The next piece on page 2, you can see that I've quoted some kind of big language. That's language from the state. So when I've mentioned numerous times article item 13 in the referendum, we've been using language that says essentially if the state gives you more money for education after the referendum, it goes to city. And I mentioned this on Monday night because those funds, while I think the city is using their discretion on how those funds get purposed, they're intended to be used for school use. I can show you messaging from the governor and the Department of Education that says this is the intention of these dollars. So I investigated why we do it differently than communities all around us. And the only thing that people could tell me, and I've talked to Heather at the city also, was, well, that's just what you've been putting in the referendum item. Legally, you have the state language to do it any way you want. And so I copied that state language and put it in here. And the key difference is the word or. And when you use the word or instead of first, second, third, the control of those dollars goes back to the school committee and what those funds get used for. But I want to be upfront and transparent about it. That would be a shift in what's been voted on the last few years. And this it's not interesting use of the law. It's the way in which the law is used everywhere else that I've talked to. And we can't discern why it was different here, but there's nothing in charter, nothing in legal precedent that says it has to be that way here. But I would want your approval to take that approach. And then on the last page, I just put my recommendation. We should take the time to process the enormous amount of information before us, ask any questions you may have, and consider all we can. We're at a place of preferences and passions, and I think that we're all mindful of that. And it can be hard to reach consensus over the next several meetings with the proposed budget, recommendations for reductions, and recommendations yet to come. But I do think that it feels a lot better to go into the city chambers with a proposed budget that has the full support of the committee. And I'm stating it for myself as a resident, a parent of students who go to school here, a taxpayer, and a superintendent. I can support these numbers presented, but I also want you to know that some of this was hard, and I'm sure there'll be changes. And we're going to need some direction as we move forward to do the work for you with the areas that we go. But I know our situation is a challenging one, but we're prepared to carry out the will of the committee. So with that, I will take any questions you may have, gather input or things that you want us to come back to you with. And I know that there's some for public comment.
Member Bowden.
Thank you. So I guess a recommendation that I would like to set forth for the next meeting is, with the personnel consent agendas we've been getting, there have been dozens of resignations and retirements and stuff. Can we take a look at those positions that have recently become vacant and see if there's any wiggle room with those positions as far as removing them from our budget? Yeah, thank you.
Member Hurd.
Thank you. I would also ask too, I know on that list that you gave us of like some potential things that you're thinking of cutting or whatnot, there were some things on there that you had talked about, like reclassification and like working some things around, and we just haven't really talked about that at all. And I know when it comes to personnel, those types of things are not public comment. It's not a public decision. So I'm assuming that we'll probably get to that at some point, but I just want to put it out there that I would like to look at those types of things and discuss all that before we.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I guess I'm curious if maybe we could look at the list and say maybe itemize. I'd like to know more about that. And then I think I could frame appropriately how we go about that. I just want to be cautious. We're not talking about specific personnel in a public session because that would be problematic.
Member Whitlow.
I want to follow up with what Ms. Parks mentioned about if we take that $500,000 out of the special education budget, then we'll have to scrape for it next year. And that was one of my biggest concerns. And so I just want to say that I support keeping that money in the budget.
On the subject of preferences and passions, I don't know if we have time in the remaining meetings for any kind of a very brief presentation, but I would like to hear more about the number of students that have been impacted by the Store Next Door program. And that, I don't know if everyone knows, but that wasn't funded by the school department for a long time. They were billing and through an outside agency. And it took years and years and years of that program sort of operating kind of on its own before it grew. And then we've added the positions last year. And that's really had an impact on the amount of students that it's been able to serve and keep in school and help in a lot of ways. And now we're cutting that back down really quickly. And so I think that not everyone knows the impact of that program that has on a huge portion of our students. And so if we could get some kind of numbers, data from that program, that would be good.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we could pull that together. And just so you know, kind of behind the scenes, the the number that we used to calculate was a $50,000 reduction. It wasn't in full, but it's a pretty meaningful chunk. It would be very hard for certain things to be provided. So I think we could definitely bring them back for presentation.
I would also like, I know you and I have talked about it, but I would also like to say publicly that I think there's some opportunity in the store next door to do some billing for main care services that are provided that currently aren't billed. And I think that that could be a benefit to help offset the costs of that program as well. Member Whitlow? No, you're good. Member Damon?
Just kind of for the general public and a clarification, and we have the data here, although I can't quite seem to touch it right at the moment, but Adam, could you give us the actual ask of the local taxpayers? I know that we have, it's almost 100,000, it's almost 100 million total. And the reimbursement that we get from the state and from the other programs, what is the local ask? Is the local ask like 31 million, something like that? Is that, do you know what that number is?
So I'm looking,
Yeah.
I'm looking at the revenue sheet. Adam, is that where I want to be for that? So the total local is 27,427,174. So I'd say 27.5 million.
Currently, that's the local ask.
That's the local ask.
That's, that's less actual dollars than we asked for in 1998. And a 1998 dollar to replace it in purchasing power today every one of those dollars would have to be $1.85. So we're actually asking with this budget of the local tax base less than we were 25 years ago. It's just hard to see how our purchasing power has decreased to that level, and that we think that we can make more cuts in this. The special ed budget in particular is one that it's under the previous superintendent, there was a $2.5 million hack at the very last minute without the approval of the school committee. And that's never been gotten back. And I just, with all of the issues that we have around the DOJ and everything else, I just can't see how we're trimming this budget to this extent and not asking more of the local. The local share now is going to be something in the range of about $12 of a $35 mill rate. And yet we're twice the size of the city's budget. We have never gotten what is probably the appropriate amount of money. If we want to talk about what becomes systemic, if you continue to shortchange the schools for the last 25 years, the people who are now the parents and potentially some of the grandparents were on the leading edge of that short change in our educational, requirement. We wonder why where we're at. We've been shortchanging the schools in this city for at least 25 years that I can go back and find. It has to stop, or we're never going to break this. We're never going to get where we need to go, or want to go. We just somewhere along the line, we have to be able to be funded at the local level that makes sense for our city to grow and improve. And doing this to it is not going to accomplish that. It's as simple as that. We're looking at Portland, which has about 700 more students than we have. Their school budget is 150, close to 150, close to $50 million more than ours. They have the same kind of challenges, but they've only got 700 more students. So just goes back to prove, we are not doing the job here. If we don't ask, we need to make the ask, and we need to be able to defend it and fight for it.
Any other questions, comments? Member Popelant.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that member Scott is not here because I would like to see some comparison of the departments at the city level and see their requests and see the increase they're asking.
Open up to the public comment now.
Hello, all. Good to see you again. I just wish it was different circumstances, you know. Ron Potvin, 291 Pond Road, former school committee member, former budget committee member, and presently chief operating officer for the store next door. I want to talk about the budget and what you're looking at coming forward from here on in, where you start deliberating the different pieces that have been presented. And you know, I hate to see that, you know, what was predicted 3 years ago is coming to light. And through all these budget sessions of the past 3 years, there was one thing that always stood out, and it always hit me. And that was the emphasis on the most vulnerable students. And I remember 3 years ago, taking a look at the different programs, and there was a lot of work to be done in all of them. And you can basically break it down into, you know, general ed, ELL, special ed, alternative, homeless. And I just want to reflect on when you're moving forward in your deliberations. There's two things in both sides of the city, whether I'm in Lewiston or Auburn, I've always said at budget time, what's your priority? And whatever you're looking at, is there a need to exist? So when you take a look at your different breakdowns, general education, when you are deliberating what that's going to look like, you're going to be shifting classrooms, you're going to be shifting teachers, you're going to be shifting programs. Ultimately, those students will get an education, may not be what anybody in this room wants to see, but they'll get an education. ELL is protected by the government right now. We already got our hands slapped on it 3 years ago, so that's not changing. They're protected. Special ed, with the emphasis of all of the changes and the reorganization that's been made, even they have the opportunity for outsourcing, other placements, other programs, etc. Alternative education, presently contracted out. You can continue to expand a contract. You can go to a different contract. You could attempt again to try something in-house. There's options. What I want to talk about tonight is homelessness. The students who in this department, when you take a look at what they need for themselves, and you take a look at their options, if something is taken away from homelessness programs, there isn't another set of parents step up. There isn't another home to step up. There isn't, we fight for the shelters to try to expand that. We have so little support in that area. Basically, what's been brought up about reductions in the homeless program. You're taking the several hundred students, homeless students of this district, and making them face nothing. They don't have an option. And the thing that I found fascinating about the homeless culture is that it's across the board. So you have homeless in general ed, homeless in special ed, homeless in alternative, homeless in ELL. I want to make the similarity of a vehicle. If you get a brand new car and you don't have spark plugs in it, it doesn't matter how good your tires, your interior, your body work, your engine, the power of your engine, doesn't matter. Spark plugs are very small. It's amazing that those things basically make that car run. If you don't have those spark plugs in there and those spark plugs aren't sharp enough, nothing happens. When I say the word priority, 3 years ago, I believe, when I presented the idea of the Lonely Resource Center, working with the homeless, I made that and articulated it that should be the priority of the Lewiston School Department. They are our weakest link, our most brittle group, vulnerable. And when you take a look at that, you have to say, when others can be supported otherwise, the homeless need to be a priority. Does it need to exist? Our homeless numbers have increased. Everyone knows the debate that's happened in the city about homelessness. I always said, in budget meetings, I've always said, don't cut something that eventually you're going to want to put in or have happen. If it's something that can go bye-bye and 10 years from now, you're not really going to address it. That's one thing. But with homelessness and what we're faced in this city, does need to exist a comprehensive program that was started 3 years ago. And we've pushed it as fast as we can, and disappointingly, not just from my perspective, as proposing it, not to where I expected this program to be 3 years later. And now we're talking about reducing it. This has been frustrating. The positive to this is that the Lonely Resource Center has stepped forward, has given the opportunity to work collaboratively with the store next door, in an enormous effort and an outreach effort to start making a difference. And I see the difference in these kids. And I see the difference that they can make in their talents and bringing it to the other parts of the Lewiston School Department. We've begun something that is cutting edge. It is a priority. It needs to exist. We have people in place, but we've stopped in adding to the program. I would just ask two things of the school committee. One, tonight when you go home, just take a moment to think about this and take a look at your homes and what you have. And then, bring it back to the store next door and the staffing, the Lewiston staffing that's there. Take a look at the need. Take a look at what they're doing. I hope this comes out that there is an opportunity of the 2.5 staff. I know I pushed for a budget of 8 people in this program, but they've got 2.5. For what they're doing, the responsibilities that have been added to them. And still, we make the progress with the homeless, the outreach, the educational success. And this was the whole reason we established this, for the educational success. So I just ask you to take the opportunity. Are the most vulnerable students in our system a priority? And does this particular program, of what we really haven't even been able to build out to what it should have been, have the need to exist and should you make this a priority financially to make it happen? I'd ask at least the day program be kept intact as budgeted, which would be another position and a half. The night program, I think at this point is just, we'll wait and see in the future. But I ask that you seriously consider keeping the day program intact. The additional 1.5 positions to be added to that existing group so that you do not fall behind. You don't need to pick up pieces later, that we can keep this going at a good pace and and knowing that it's going to bring that many more results in the future. So I just thank you, and I hope that you can deliberate and get the information and let's make this happen. This is such a priority. 3 years ago, I had nothing to do with the homeless. I had nothing to do with it. And I saw, and I dug into it when it was presented as a school committee member. And I realized, wow, okay, I get it now. You're talking about lives. You're not talking about a kid's education here. You're talking about the impact of this program affects their lives. And if we lose the program, it diminishes, we lose the student. And these kids just don't go home to their parents, they disappear. They're gone. And what price do we pay as society? Thank you for your consideration.
Ron, can you turn that mic off, please? Thank you. Member Whitlow?
Thanks, Ron.
Yep.
So I know that in our paperwork, there was there was info about restructuring the store next door, but we haven't actually discussed what that means at the district level, correct?
Right. So we're going back in time a bit. I did share with the executive director that over the next few years, we want to be looking at how funding can be obtained by them or through the store next door to help hold up the cost of the staff and then transition to that way. And then we would look at how we could support, through space, through access, and through other means. We wanted to grow pieces of it, but we were trying to find that balance. So that conversation was had, but that was not that long ago. We have not made a restructuring plan. They've not secured funding to this date that I'm aware of. They're trying, but from a restructuring plan, what I did was I noted $50,000 that we would try to find a way to pull out of that support as a potential reduction. It wouldn't eliminate it. And I don't know if the store next door can generate funding to support it in its capacity. The existing half position was a reallocation of existing funds. It is not in this budget. So right now you'd be looking at the potential for 2 staff, one who has a salary, one has an ed tech compensation. And if approved, a reduction of $50,000 committed to that, if approved as presented.
50,000, a reduction of 50,000 in addition to those positions we just added last year. The additional positions would also be eliminated, correct?
So you reallocated existing funds for 1 year. For this year, we had added 4 positions. That was back, I don't know if it was in the fall or January window. But those positions didn't carry forward into this budget. And I believe only that halftime person's been hired in that capacity.
Could we get numbers on how many students are being serviced through them and what gains we've made? I think because we don't really know like what services are being provided.
Member Hurd?
Thank you. So, and I don't know how the structure works at the store next door, so I am just looking for like a little bit of clarification, but the staff that are there, like who do they report to? Who do they, who is their boss per se, you know what I mean? Kind of what, Member Whitlow was saying, like, who makes sure that the processes are being met, or these services are being provided, or those types of things, like checks and balances to make sure that what they're being paid for, or what services we're expecting them to do are actually, like, things are followed through with.
So what we've been looking at is that these land under Philip Johnston moving forward, because he's at the Longley site and has more intimate familiarity with the day-to-day operations. Currently, Jamie reports to me. She oversees the staff that she has. And you know, the primary work that they're doing, and actually probably better for them to come and explain it, but they take in lots of donations. There's both in material, food, clothes, other, and also financial donations that they help secure things with for students. They have a space just past the gym lobby at the high school. Students are in and out of there all day long, getting different things, different needs trying to be met. The Longley site still has some students in and out. That's been more of a space to grow out their capacity. I don't want to say a warehouse, but the store next door used to be like a kind of a big closet, and now they've got some real space where they can put things out and have more of an inventory for students. So that's more of that gist. But it's kind of the intent, as Mr. Potvin shared. The vision of this thing was that it was going to have multiple staff, supports in the evening for students to have a meal, to have tutors, to have counselors, and trying to build up to that capacity. Construction was slow because of the pandemic and things are moving, but the vision from a cost perspective is more expensive, or we'd have to secure funding through a different means, whether it's the store next door or unique partnership opportunity because we're a school system. We haven't gotten that yet. I think it could come at some point, but we haven't gotten it yet.
Member Bowden?
Thank you. So when Ron was speaking, and thank you, Ron, for getting up and saying all that. When he was talking about us thinking about, long-term, what are we here for, and what are we looking to protect? And I take a look back at the list that you gave us of the potential cuts. It looks like it is the smallest section in this is administration. Where we have an assistant principal that you have listed, which I believe, you correct me if I'm wrong, is a vacant position that we're just possibly not going to or along those lines. In 2 principal clerk positions added in error. So I just wonder if we can take another look, if you guys could take another look at administration, and if there, I certainly hate the idea of getting rid of more people, but is there anything in administration that we can cut back on? Like, especially, there seems to be a lot of people at the Dingley Building. I know everyone's important and everyone does a job, but when we're talking about our kids and our most vulnerable, we have a lot of cuts in special education, and we have basically 1 cut in administration, and that just doesn't sit well with me. So I was hoping you could look into that as well.
We can look. I can tell you that the feedback from the administration when I reduced by an administrator was pretty strong. I think the letter from Mr. Ferrara in his handout is really speaking to that. But I'm certainly willing to look.
Just to stand on my soapbox a little bit longer, I'm sure that the pushback from administration and from all levels that have lots of voices will be pretty strong on cuts. But the population that doesn't have a lot of voice is the homeless population. And so they need a voice. They can't make that protest for themselves. So I think that we need to do that for them. Any further questions, comments, suggestions? If not, is anyone opposed to taking a quick 5-minute break before we continue with the agenda? Okay, we will be in recess for 5 minutes. Jake let me know during the break that we have a little bit more of the budget stuff to continue to review that I didn't realize. So we just have a little bit more before we move on with the rest of the agenda.
I don't have another memo to read to you or anything. What I'd like to look at is the budget reductions memo we passed out on the 8th. I just want to walk through it to see if tonight there's anything that stands out to you of, yes, I want to know more about that, just to give us some homework. And so I was just going to sit at the top and walk through. If you want to dive into why you want to know more, fine, but I guess I kind of want to say the thing, and if you want to know more, just kind of do this, and I will make note that you want to know more about that. It's March 8th. The reductions are on page 2. Let me just share it with you. Yeah, it's good point. Member Bowden just noticed that it's also on the handout that I passed out Monday night. So the list is the same. We did add a couple little things to the end of the list. Yeah, I'll state the list out loud and just let me know if it's, unless you want to just look and tell me areas of interest.
This list?
Mhm.
Okay.
Karen's going to track it. I asked her to make a copy. The problem with the budget process is we end up with 9 versions of the same document and it's hard to find.
Got it. Go.
All right, so just starting at the top, we have 1-to-1 general ed techs, 2 duty aid, general education ed tech.
I have a question. Are you able to identify, like, without it being specific to people, like what school these positions are at or what grade level or anything to sort of give us indication of where they are at all?
I think that that's more dangerous than
Okay.
it's worth. But I also think if you really are curious about that specifically, that's the kind of thing we can make note of right now to try to figure out how to bring that back to you in a way that's not a violation
Specific,
of
okay.
personnel.
All right. Member Bowden?
Thanks. I would love, and I guess you can just, in general, kind of explain to us the one-on-one ed text positions that you're cutting in every category, because that seems like super important, and it seems like it would probably be part legally of someone's IEP or 504 plan. And why would it be in there if it wasn't needed? And I personally heard from teachers who said, we need more one-on-one. And so I don't understand how any one-on-one ended up in this budget. So if you could go a little further into those for us, please.
That particular one I feel comfortable talking about now, but I can also bring it back. A 1-to-1 general ed tech would be for a 504 medical accommodation. And it's specific to that. And that position happened to be vacant. It's a student that is no longer with us. And so the position was kind of matriculated into the school for multiple uses, but not assigned specifically to a student. So at least that particular role.
I'm sorry. And do we not have any students that need that currently? Like, we don't have any other students that would need that one-on-one?
Not that particular one. We do have, there are others in the budget that are not reduced. So that we do have 1-to-1 ed techs that do exist.
So you're just
in the district, for 504s, but
so the one you were talking about is in the regular instruction, like that just wasn't a filled position.
I don't recall if it's still filled or not, but I know the student that had that need is no longer with us.
Okay. And so the rest of, I mean, you have one, you have like 12 one-on-one ed techs in special education. I know you're going through a list, but I just, if we could kind of go over like every one-on-one and why they're there.
Yeah, so those particular ones, they're vacant and they were carried through budget and for different programming and different spaces. One of the things that we found both of the audit work last year and then again this year, when we really got to look at our who do we have for students and what's in the budget at another detailed level, there was a lot of one-to-one ed techs that at some point in time got assigned to our budget because there was a student that had a need. And then as the student either grew and graduated or left Lewiston Public Schools for whatever reason, or they were outplaced, so they had that service elsewhere, those positions were never pulled out of the budget. And so those are, I don't want to say they're corrections because they're real positions, but they're deemed as we can do without them. Those kinds of cuts are not, we're not going to provide, I want to stop for a second. What these are not is saying that we're not going to provide a service that we should by way of an IEP or a 504. These are saying that they're either vacant, the students have moved on, or the services are being provided in a different way. Okay, sliding down, we have grade 5 or 6 classroom teacher, grade 3 teacher. Those are built around enrollments. And again, we're still working with those projections. Instructional equipment, that's just a line reduction in general. A pre-K teacher and a pre-K ed tech, again, mentioned earlier, those are around projections of enrollment. ELL teacher, combination of unfilled and enrollment. Music teacher, we talked a bit about, like for example, that instrumental teacher that right now we have someone part-time that's working in that way. Hopefully that continues to work. World language teacher was a potential attrition piece and very difficult to hire. Expeditionary learning was around the theory that there's a working knowledge of expeditionary learning at the middle school to continue that and being able to live without someone doing it full time. Alternative school ed tech was actually something that we found that we don't currently have in our budget. We actually don't have alternative ed programming. So we do our next step work, but that's separate from alternative ed. So that was a reduction that was vacant.
Thank you. Back one. So you were saying having someone doing that job full time, would that mean you're looking to reduce it to part-time or you're looking to just reduce it completely?
We're looking to reduce it.
Okay.
The next few positions or several positions, English language arts, math, blended math position. And the difference between those is the blended math was intended, actually, I had asked for that in the budget when I was a principal, for someone to do like online courses, more remote for some of our students who had either challenges for being in school or having a pocket of students have remote for different life circumstances. The way in which that's been used in part was for a lab. And then some of these are also vacant. And then the key to all of this was really around the enrollment numbers. We did find some pockets connected to the high school, for example, where some class sizes were 5, 6, 7, or 8, and other class sizes were 16, 18, 19, 20. And when we're looking at classroom size at the elementary level of 16 plus, it for me, in a very difficult, challenging budget year, it made sense to talk to that administrative team to find out what things could be reduced that would create classroom sizes that were more consistent. The ELL instructional coach interventionist was a split job. We've struggled to hire for that, and they believe they can provide the service differently. Technology equipment, some of this was kind of blanket. I'm asking technology to find some reductions. Another area was in regular instruction, there was a bunch of replacement laptop and iPad bags or cases, if you will, to cover them. We have some in storage, and I'm willing to roll the dice on not needing additional, at least for next year. Also, Mark and his team do a great job trying to find resources. So there's a number of reductions in technology equipment because they're trying to find ways to do it differently. The next one down, you see 1-to-1 504 ed tech. This is similar to the one above. It's coded differently for some reason. So that's the language that got pulled out of the coding of the budget, but that would be what it says. It's that 504 person to do that one-on-one service. And again, I can go find specifics that's either vacant or not needed. We're not cutting any ed techs that are one-on-one that have a 504 attached to it. And so if you see 504 gen ed, that means it's around a 504. Otherwise, it would say special ed. Facilities and maintenance, really that's projects and project reductions. So if a school wanted to paint a wall or fix a floor or do some of those things, we try to go through the list and say, what could we live without? And it's a direct cost. And so that's that reduction. The utilities and project reductions, we looked at those. And I use project again because it's different kinds of projects, more in the utilities mechanical realm. So there's some reductions there. Going up to back to the top, but on the second column in special education, we work closely with Director Crafts on these. These are things that she really believes that we can function without. So this is that next round of structurally, we have the ability to function without these positions. I did give her a level of reassurance that I would try to position ourselves intelligently with this reserve so that if we ran up against some walls and some significant needs, that we would not just have nowhere to go. So when Chair Parks mentioned it's kind of a 2-3-way gamble, it is. So if we don't do the reserve piece, my hesitation even putting these on the list becomes even bigger. But I also know that's a possibility. But in that listing, 2 resource room teacher positions, 9 RISE BHPs, a dozen ed techs, a 1-to-1 BHP. And just some differences there. Some programs require additional adult support. So that'd be more your ed tech. And then sometimes you have like an additional adult support because of behavior. That's when you get into your BHP. 2 functional life skills BHPs. So these are folks that work with students in and around behaviors, but in the functional life skills programs only. That's some of our most severely disabled students, oftentimes physically, and physically and learning disabled students.
Were any of these positions unfilled for the school year?
A lot of the special ed positions were unfilled. Most were unfilled. And then you have the 10 resource room ed techs. In CTE, the teacher leader stipends and the culinary stipend, those were actually entered twice. So those are pullouts from errors. Rob presented some reductions in his office. He said he'll just figure out a way to make it work. There were some slated culinary repairs to their kitchen area that were pulled out. Money for professional development, which again, Rob's intentions are to use Perkins funds for that, which is allowable. The assessments piece also using Perkins funds, so it's allowable. So kids would still have the opportunity, but he's going to have to work at how that happens. And the EAD technology, if my memory serves me right, that is a software package for the engineering program that Rob believes you can pay for in a different way. CT is unique in that they have Perkins 4 funding. None of our other schools have those dollars. It's a federal grant that allows them to get equipment, supplies, software, access to PD, curriculum work. There's a whole menu of things that they can use those funds for. There's some rules and constraints around them, but these are things that are allowable, which is why he said we could pull that from the general fund and I can use Perkins. The problem with that is when you use those dollars for Perkins, you can't use those dollars for other things that you were going to do with Perkins.
Member Heard.
Thank you. So I think that's great that Rob's been able to find some alternative pathways to make those things happen. But I think the assessments for credentials is a big thing. And if for some reason there is not money there or he's not able to get money, and he comes to us and says, I can't find money, then we have to find money to be able to offer those credentials to our students because that's the whole point of LRTC. So I just want to make that known that that's great that he's thinking that he can find it somewhere else. But if for some reason he can't, like we have to make sure that we can make that happen.
Yeah, I agree. The industry credentials are really important. Let's see here. Under student and staff support, we have office staff clerk. Some folks identified some reductions, much through attrition, learning who can do what things and who's taken on different tasks. So kind of thinking of the reorganization or reorganizing their office tasks a little differently. Principal clerk 1 in the library. This is connected to the high school where they have a librarian and then other staff that help facilitate. Not an easy thing to put on there. The store next door restructuring, again, behind the scenes, what I put on that for a number was $50,000. We carry the lead person. I'm trying to avoid names, even though I know it's pretty obvious. The lead person there on a salary, and then also one additional staff that is paid an ed tech rate. And then you reallocated unspent funds this year for 4 additional staff on top of those 2. They have filled 1 part-time, looking at some others. I think it lacks the attraction it might have because we have been upfront and saying those are for this year only. And unless they're added to the budget, they're currently not in the budget. And so that's the limitation there.
I just raised my hand when I could just speak. Go ahead, Ms. Hurd.
Thank you. And I wanted to say this before, but you're also hoping that the store next door can get some funding on their own too. And that's kind of like, and I'm not trying to speak for you, but maybe that's your thought process along this line too, is maybe there'll be a nonprofit or whatever, however that works, or where they get their funding.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. It isn't my hope to reduce it and what they can provide. It's my hope that other funding can be found. So the uniqueness of this relationship is that the store next door is its own nonprofit, but we're paying the salaries. And so there's a nuance there that is challenging. There are so many services and kids that need the supports. I don't challenge that one bit. I do think over time, or at least my thinking, in which we shared with all of you, that over time, we would find a way for them to secure funding that their executive team would say, well, we're going to use this to pay some of the salary and we're going to use it to pay some of the ed tech. But the time frame hasn't evolved yet. And so I think that's a challenge there. But I think to your question, yeah, we plan on maintaining it. I also want to note, and we can bring this back to you, we have a full-time McKinney-Vento staff that does nothing but identify and provide supports through the McKinney-Vento funding that is paid for in the local fund, large in part. Does McKinney pay for that in some part or full, that position that we pay for that locally? So that's an additional person that's paid locally to do outreach work. We also have stipends and other ways to support what we call points of contact at different schools, so that students within a school have a person to go to in the school to get help or to be identified as homeless. So the need is greater than the resources we're providing it, but it's not that we're not providing resources.
I have a question. The 4 positions that were added and only half of one has been filled, that was funded through ESSER funds?
No, that was one we
Reallocation.
brought to you from a reallocation. Yeah, we had so many positions unfilled this year, but we wanted to see what we could get that to do. That you had voted to support using 4 positions worth of funds in that way.
So since those positions have not been filled yet, are those funds essentially still available to continue those positions that much longer? Since they haven't been used?
Good question. So it'll turn into fund balance, whatever's not used. And then annually you have to decide how much fund balance are we using to stand up the budget. And so
So since we didn't use those funds for those 3.5 positions for, say, 6 months, that doesn't give us a 6-month extension into the next school year. Okay.
No. It's a good question though, but the money does end up back into the cycle, if you will, on some kind of delay. It's you're gonna get post-year audit, so it has a delay to it. I wouldn't say 2 years on that, it's more one, but there are some things in the cycle that are 2 for sure. The next one is a med tech. The history of that position was it was approved here locally to add a person that would work with the nurse at the high school, because there's so many kids both between the tech center at 700 or 800 and the high school at 1,1400, that there'd be an additional staff to help with things there. That was deemed not needed by the folks who were providing those services. And so that position was then moved to Farwell because they have a functional life skills program, actually multiple, and they have some students that require really high level need. For example, like feeding tube for lunch and things like that, that have to be performed by a nurse. And so it felt like a better place for that need. And that's that potential reduction there. And also to mention that we have nurse positions in ESER currently that we don't have the funds sustaining them in next year, 2 of them. And so just for context, and this might be something we want to talk more about, the level of need has certainly gone up. I know we've gotten some messaging from nurses. And the rock and hard place I find myself in is the state believes, and I emphasize the state believes, that there should be an 800-to-1 ratio for nurses in our schools. So having 1 nurse per school by number would be, according to the state subsidy, in excess of what we need. So what that means is we pay the rest locally. So any additional nursing services after that 800-to-1, we're paying for directly here. What we did years ago to bolster our capacity is we added a floater position that more or less lives out of Connors. So there's 2 nurses here, 1 designated if we need coverage elsewhere. And then we added a floater position at Geiger, some ESER, some local, but we added a position at Geiger. So there are 2 nurses at Geiger. We added a floater position that became the person that's at Next Step. So that was an additional person, and they're at a size now that I feel comfortable having someone there, but that person also leaves that campus at times to cover other gaps. And then there are 2 additional that are just straight ESER on top of all that just float to where we need them in the district. So I didn't do the math, and I named them all, but I didn't do the math on how many nurses that is, but we can get all that to you on paper and get it back to you for sure.
Member Hurd.
Thank you. So that was my question. Where are we with that? But also too, and something else you can bring to us, which the email that the nurses had sent to us was a little bit ago, but one of the questions that I wanted to ask was, where does that leave us legally? Because some of the things that they mentioned were there's some medication that can only be administered by a nurse. It can't be administered by actual like other admin in the building. So God forbid there was a medical emergency, and then if we lose these 2 ESER positions and that leaves a nurse out of a building and a student needs something, like legally, where are we in that? So kind of like that whole, want to make sure we're covered, so if any and all information you could bring back to us, I think would be super helpful.
Yeah, we can do that. There's no real positive or popular way to say this. We functioned with 4 or 6 less nursing staff in our district prior to the pandemic. But certainly know that our needs have shifted. And so when I mention potential legal challenges and things that could open up to legal risks, that I would include that in that conversation.
Member Whitlow.
I think it's very telling that when you say we have these new ESER filled nurse positions and they're being used elsewhere when needed, that it's very clear to us that they're needed. So that's kind of scary to think that that will be there on the chopping block. And I know nurses are always on the chopping block, right? Like I feel like every budget season, that's always a big issue, but we know the demand on these nurses, and that's scary to see more leaving.
Yeah. Can I say ditto? Our nurses are not bored. I can tell you that right now. Never been by one of the nurses' office and thought they have nothing to do. They're incredibly busy. The level of need has certainly changed. I would also note if we want to maintain the level of nurses that we have, we would have to be looking at adding 3 back to the general fund that are not currently in the budget. Next section down, we have administration, again, assistant principal. That was actually slated for this building. And just to throw context at it, there's a team structure here. They're incredibly busy. I'd encourage you to shadow one of them for a day. I'd bring sneakers. The challenge that I have when I look at the whole makeup is there's an AP, an SEL, and an RTI person that are working kind of as a 3-person team at each of these grade bands. And I think that when I pull that back, and it's easy to say on a piece of paper, they're all working incredibly hard all day long, long hours, lots of challenges. There's 9 people and a principal, so that's 10. And I look at the other schools, and by comparison, like a Montello that has a similar population, they have 2 assistant principals and 1 other person that helps them throughout the day. And so there's a pretty big discrepancy there. But I can argue all day long that the level of need in this school is greater than the level of need at maybe a Montello. And so it's got its challenges. The last one on here is a correction, so I think that one's pretty easy, but again, it's like you can see me pausing as I say these things because none of these are pleasant. The corrections are easy. The vacant positions, I can run you through them real quick. When we're talking about the level of support we're providing kids and the things that we need, I have days where I land with Member Damon who says, I don't know how we do less, or how we do more with less, or how we do the same with less. And ironically, he and I looked at a document that he was able to dig up, and it was from 1998. And the ask of the local community was more than what we're asking today in 1998. The ask then was, I think, just over $30 million. And we're looking for 27 this year. I kind of went into descriptions of some of those things, but if you want, are there things you want to know more about within that list? At any point in time, please just shoot us an email or ask us next time. We'll get you more data. I'm sorry, yes, additions. I'm looking at the old one. So the additions are the ones that were added on Monday. And so we found, actually Adam found, there were some lines in Geiger, the middle school, the high school, and one other, I'm going to forget, but he might know it. But they were compensation lines. Years ago, we had a structure where after school, if there was an incident, or you had to kind of like huddle up at the end of the day to talk about how the day went, or do some scoring, things like that, reflect on a student's programming. This was in the special purpose programs, that there was money there to compensate people for little pieces of time. But what we're finding is because of change of contracts and things like that, those chunks of dollars are not being spent. So we saw one number that was as high as, I think, $53,000 in one pocket, and we had never spent more than like 20. And so we took what we have never spent and reduced it. They're additional reductions. Yeah, sorry. I labeled them as additions because they were new to this list from the past. Yeah, bad term. I probably should have put something different there. And then the other one, as you know, we've talked about it heavily, was that special purpose private school reduction based on, again, a little bit of a gamble, but I don't know that we'll be able to spend it. That's what we have for proposed reductions.
Member Hurd.
Thank you. I know last meeting we talked a lot about, I had a lot of questions about like special programming, summer school, that kind of stuff. We talked a lot about Century 21. Is that like grant funded programs? Does that come from the state? Does that come from the federal? Is that local? Like how, can you just explain that just a little bit more?
Absolutely. So 21st Century is a federal grant that is allocated to the states, that then the states have schools or districts or even outside organizations apply for to provide after school programming. It could be before school or after school programming that fit within the parameters of the 21st Century program. So it's federal funds, and there is when you apply for that grant, there are contributions from the school department that are required, and that's reflected in the budget in terms of what our contribution to the whole is for each year to make that happen. And then we do supplement that. I think I said this the other night. We do supplement that grant with other grant funds as well. And in Jake's in talking about summer school, he talked a little bit about that. We use funds for multilingual learners that we get for additional programming. We also use some Title I reallocation funds for transportation. That actually covers all of the transportation in the summer. So we do braid some other funds with it.
I just want to add to that too. So when Karen says Title I reallocation, what that is when the funding cycle closes at the state level, they take the pocket of money and they try to redistribute it to those in need. We always apply, we sometimes get, and it varies what we get every year. And it is only dependent on what they award, and two, what's actually left in that pot to award. And so we've actually been fortunate to save a few dollars here locally with some of those things, but it's every year. And for those of you who've been on the committee for a while, every spring, like May, June almost, we apply for the 21st Century grant, and then we're waiting for an answer. And it's like the budget season's already happened. So every year that's been a challenge because we don't know if it's going to happen or not. Or not every year, but when the grant is due, I should say. But the reallocation is a big gamble. We don't know if there'll be money or if it will be awarded, and if so, how much.
And then this kind of goes into my next question. I vaguely remember Member Whitlow last budget season talking about a position for grants, someone that specifically writes grants and like does all those types of things. I think that was you, right? And I was just wondering, do we have someone? Did we hire someone? Are we still looking at that? Like, where are we along those lines?
So at the end of the day, I don't believe that made the budget. We looked for ways to add it, and with the cost, we didn't add it. I think in part two with Easter, it was a lot of work to even manage that, but there's things that didn't get put in here that I think that some people have recommended, including some of the things that are on that list, but also the grant writing position, a grant monitoring position, because every one of those grants has unique criteria for reporting and did you do it and did you track it and all of that. Another one has been someone for marketing, just to go around to the schools and capture more of the great things that are happening every day and constantly kind of push them out. We don't have that in our district. So some of the other pieces that are in the classroom that could be beneficial to our district.
Any other questions? No.
All right, so we do not have a meeting on Monday. We connect again next Wednesday, and just from a budget perspective, we'll bring what we can back to you related to that. These questions and some other things that may pop up. Again, please email us if you're hearing questions from others or you have your own.
Agenda item number 11 is report from school committee chair. The only thing I have to share tonight is that Ramadan started tonight at sunset. And so just a reminder to teachers, staff, students, and the community as a whole, Muslims who practice Ramadan, they fast all day long from when the sun comes up to the sun goes down. So they may be cranky, irritable, thirsty, hungry, tired. And then they also have late night prayers into late in the evenings. And that can even impact the younger students who may not be participating in Ramadan, but they're still up late for the prayers and different parts of that. So just a reminder to the community as a whole to keep that in mind for the next 30 days. or so. Agenda item number 12 is report from the superintendent.
Some items that you're going to see on the upcoming meeting. We've gone through the feedback on the mission, vision, and strategic priorities. So we're going to have that back in front of you. We also have upcoming our calendar conversation for next school year. We also have, and this is usually positive news, we have a handful of students for reentry conversation. So we'll have some executive sessions to talk about what we're hoping is very positive news. I also want to add, we messaged out today some information about what unfolded at two of our elementary schools yesterday afternoon. I'd like to share just a little more detail. Obviously, that's a weapon on school grounds. We take that very seriously. In one instance, a very young student, kindergarten level, was holding what looked like a steak knife, like something that you would have at home, not like a fold out or a really big kind of knife. And she looked like she was kind of using it like a magic wand playfully as she got on the bus. And that was noticed right away. And as it got reported to adults, administration worked on that and were able to ultimately isolate that and work with parents. We are trying to verify, this may take some time, students that are come in contact with this individual, make sure that they were never threats. To also look at things like, what was the cause for having the knife? Are you feeling bullied? Do you not feel safe? So really trying to take it from both angles and work on that. Same thing in the other situation, although not using it like a wand playfully. There was no threat being made to our knowledge at this point in time, still investigating, to any of the other students. What happened was the student got on the bus, opened up her bag, third grade student opened up her bag. And when the bag opened, the student sitting near them could see in the bag and saw what looked like a knife that you would use to cut vegetables at home in the bag. It was never taken out or used to threaten or anything. But when the students saw it, they said, "Hey, she's got a knife." And the driver notified admin actually here at Connors, and they went out and secured that and did a search. And again, are following up with, was it about being safe or feeling safe, bullying, any threats to others, any flashing of that during the day, all that kind of stuff. And those students are both out until we have that all resolved. So we're trying to do our due diligence on that. Just want to reiterate to the community that there was no known threat to others at this time, but we're not going to just stop asking the question. We're going to make sure.
Member Hurd.
Thank you. So I have to admit that I think we talked about our last meeting about talking about our parent subcommittee and how we're going to get that up and running. And I think those are kind of things that we also can talk about in that kind of instance. And it happens to the best of us. My son yesterday brought his iPod to school. And I said, as a school committee member's child, you cannot be bringing those things to school. So even the best of us, it happens to, and I completely get that. But just, and I check his backpack 25 times before he leaves the house in the morning. So I think just those conversations with parents on like checking backpacks and being mindful and those types of things are all conversations. And I know we're in a crazy budget season, so there are not enough days in the week to add another meeting. But hopefully we can get there at some point.
Yeah, I agree. I think we will pretty soon.
Agenda item number 13 is a report from the city council rep who is absent tonight. 14 student reps who are also not here this evening. Number 15 is any updates from the subcommittees. Has anyone met and have an update for us? Member Beauplan?
We haven't met yet, but there's a facilities meeting tomorrow, 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock at Dingley. And also looking ahead, correct me if I'm wrong, Member Eames, we have a math curriculum meeting on Monday, April 3rd here at Dingley.
Thank you. Any other updates? Member Whitlow?
Yeah, we just received notice that we will start the tech specialist and system administrator bargaining unit negotiations. This will be 3 years ago when we negotiated, was it 3 years ago already? The new tech bargaining unit. So that it was two. This will be the second time we're negotiating this brand new bargaining unit. So that'll be an interesting one. So I look forward to it.
Member Damon?
Just to clarify, facilities is not going to be meeting tomorrow. With something else is, so just so you know, Paul, we won't be meeting on tomorrow. So you can take that off your calendar. But we are actively working on several major projects in facilities. So.
Member Eames.
Yes, policy has continued to meet and we have been plowing through a lot of them. You'll see them soon. Maybe when the budget committee stuff settles down, we'll bring you a packet full of things that have been revised or added or, yeah, revised or added.
Thank you.
Member Damon. I think, Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, did we get a notice also from Gen Ed? From general government, I'm sorry, general government.
I didn't see them.
We didn't get negotiations yet. We had some questions to. We're not at a meeting point yet. We've done some, they've asked for some facts. So we're providing facts at this point.
Number 17 is, 16, school committee community announcements. Does anyone have any community announcements? Member Medina?
It's not so much an announcement, but the other, I think it was yesterday, Generational Nor came to the high school to talk to youth about substance use. And I worked with a youth today who told me how happy she was that that happened. I guess there was a student or somebody that was speaking that was her age that she went to school with, that she saw acting out, and learning the backstory of like this person's story has inspired her now that she's like healed and, you know, advocating for, you know, kids to do better and things like that. So anyways, I just want to say that that was absolutely amazing. And I'd like to see that happen more. And the student has actually talked about wanting to, you know, at some point share her story with students to inspire them to, you know, make changes and do better too. So thank you.
I know that Generational Nor has a series of these community conversations. Do you have that schedule or can we get that out somewhere? Okay, because I know that there's more planned. I just don't know when they are. Member Hurd?
Thank you. I was hoping we could get an update about the Skills USA competition, how we did. Like maybe they can present, maybe you can.
I apologize. I actually had that on my list. So we did quite well, over 40 medals and I believe 13 golds, 6 being individual, the rest being team type competitions. But we are, Director Callahan and I have already been talking about getting all of them in, as many as that can make it that night to formally recognize them. But when I say a good showing, I would say that people went home feeling like our region is the best in the state by far. Our kids really, really performed and did well.
Member Bowden?
Thank you. We got an invitation from Miss Ricker at the middle school for a performance for the Maine Inside Out. And it is Monday, May 15th and Thursday, May 18th, both at 5 p.m. That up there at the middle school.
And don't we have a school committee meeting? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Nope. Future agenda items. Member Damon?
And Jake, I noted an article today that there were CTE funds that were distributed by the state, and Lewiston was not awarded any of them. And I'm just wondering why we, you know, can we backtrack on that and find out why? I mean, one of the districts got like $4 million.
With all the patience that I can use in the moment, I can tell you that I'm aware of that we did not get rewarded funding. Rob and I have talked about it. We've discussed details, and we've also inquired with the folks that do the scoring and the redistribution of those funds. For me, it just doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. The work was done well. It speaks directly to the things in the request. And it's hard to follow. It doesn't make sense to me why we were not a recipient, being the largest program in the state.
Any other future agenda items? Number 18 is to enter into executive session on a legal matter in accordance with 1 MRSA 4056E. Is there a motion?
So moved. I'll second.
All in favor? School committee is in executive session at 8:09 PM.